Okay, hope everybody is starting out with a wonderful Taco Tuesday, as they like to put it. My name is Sandy Emerson. I'm going to be your host today, and I'm with National Flood Services. We have a co-host today in Terry Calvin. Terry's actually out in Texas, and I'm in Florida, so we kind of cover the whole country here very easily. Today we're going to be talking about technology and flood insurance, and we've certainly made an enormous stride from when this program first began to today and going forward. At the end of the week, you will receive an email that will incorporate the classes from this week and an audio of the class we're taking today. If you have any questions or you need to reach out to us at the end of this presentation, we're going to give you some email addresses where you can reach Terry or I or anyone that is part of the agent development team. This discussion today should run about 30, maybe 45 minutes, depending upon if we open up discussions a little bit further into the presentation here. Terry will be handling our poll questions today and our chat questions today. If you have any questions, by all means, please reach out to us. And Terry, if you'd like to go ahead and put up that first poll question.
Sure can. All right. Our first poll is just getting to know a little bit about you. The first question is, what best describes your experience level with flood insurance? Beginner, intermediate, or advanced? And are you an agent, office staff, sales, or other?
That's great. And
the answers are coming in fast and furious.
Excellent. This helps us get to know who our audience is, and we can talk. I know Terry has a lot of experience in the flood program, in marketing, sales. I'm an actual agent here in the state of Florida, and I have been for way too long, as you will discover as we get going on this. And it's just nice to know who we're talking to out there. So how are we looking, Terry?
Well, we've got about 74% in, but everything seems to have stopped, so I don't know if people aren't answering or what. I can go ahead and stop it if you're ready for that.
Yep, let's go ahead and perfect.
All right.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, and the future. As I said earlier, we've come a long way when it comes to this program. From the standpoint of technology, there was a time that we did everything manual. Any of you that have been around, you'll remember back in those days, we had a flood manual that every agency had in their office, and we had lots and lots of paperwork in order to go through to rate everything. But to begin with, remember with the idea that flooding is the #1 natural disaster in this country. We have a purpose for this program. When it was first decided, what we got going on here? We're having a little technical issue today. There we go. When it was first decided upon to create this organization with Congress back in 1968, it was a new program. It was a work in progress. It's still that work in progress. The NFIP program was originally created with the idea that it would have communities that would participate in this federal flood program. It was designed to provide insurance, an insurance alternative to disaster assistance to meet the escalating cost of repairing damaged buildings and contents of those that were insured. What was happening is there was minimal to no other type of insurance coverage for flood at that time. Most of the losses were being paid through the federal government, through what we now call FEMA or disaster assistance. That disaster assistance equates to taxpayers' dollars. NFIP was put into place to help balance that, to give an alternative to people to purchase this coverage. When it started out, as I said, it came with this huge manual, and if any of you have ever seen the old manuals, they're about 5, 6, 7 inches thick. They continue to be that thick, and they weigh about 300 pounds, or at least it seemed that way at the time. We didn't have zone determinations online. We had maps. All agencies had to have these maps in their offices in order to be able to help their insured. What started out as being an easy process, or I should say what ended up being an easy process, started out to be real difficult for agents back in those days, because we as agents had to actually look on those maps, and if you happened to be in an area that was growing, you would find that trying to locate some addresses on these maps were next to impossible. As you can see with the information I have on this screen, back in the prehistoric times, we had these maps. In my area that I was in at the time, we were lucky if we would have 3 streets on those maps, and we would have to locate the address that the insured was purchasing on those maps and then tell the insured whether or not they were going to need the elevation certificate. Now with the zone determinations, we also have mortgage companies and title companies that help do that. Back in the early 80s, when it first started and NFIP was mostly being written directly before even the write your own carriers came in, it was difficult to find this information in some areas. It was sometimes a nightmare. You would have to rely on those maps. Hopefully the agent or the agency kept those maps up to date and kept the manuals up to date, because if you had to make a phone call and ask someone at customer service before the write your own carriers came along, you were lucky if you could get a hold of someone, because again, this was a work in progress. There were no experts like we have today being able to answer a lot of questions. So it meant that the agent had a lot of frontline work to do. Again, locating the property on the map, then filling out the application, notifying the insured whether or not they needed that elevation certificate, and then making sure all of the documents were together, and they had to be mailed. Money had to be mailed in, and it all had a timeline that had to be met. There was no uploading. There was no credit card payments. It was strictly a check that had to be mailed and sent over to either the NFIP Direct or the write your own carriers. The write your own carriers came along in the early 80s, and once they came along, things started to change. We had much more customer service that was trained and educated on the flood program. They were developing the flood program as it was, working on really finding out what it takes to rate a property correctly. And again, this is still an ongoing process. But now we have online rating. We have zone determinations. We have other resources to reach out to get help, which did not exist several years ago. Believe me, I was there. So as we go forward, hopefully things are going to be looking a little bit easier. We'll get to that here in a minute. But currently, with our online resources, we have the manual online, we have the zone determinations online, we have websites that let us verify addresses that back in those days, none of this existed. We can look up building values in a lot of cases. We have FEMA, who has put out various websites out there, or extensions of websites, lack of a better word, where you can search for FEMA flood facts. They have flood facts on claims, on what's covered, anything you could possibly think of, disaster assistance. They have online brochures that can be downloaded or ordered free of charge. They have pamphlets. We now have, we've had for several years actually, floodsmart.gov, one designed for insureds and one designed for agents that give additional information on this program. We now have so many customer service people out there that are very well trained and understand the flood program. And again, this didn't exist even 25 years ago. It took the write your own carriers coming in and developing different rating programs, different education programs, videos, webinars, everything that we have today at our reach. Believe me, back in the day, any of you agents out there that have been around for a long time, you remember those maps. You would have to have the maps for whatever region you needed, depending on how far out you wrote from your office, it could incorporate just the town you were in or maybe an entire state, depending on again, on how far you wrote. It got to be where these maps could take up an entire room. I met an agent down in South Florida a few years ago, that actually kept all of his maps, and they were worth gold at one time because, again, very difficult to locate that information if you didn't have something to touch, feel, see, and show an insured what was going on. Now, they were a great visual tool because if you had an insured, let's say they were even in an X zone and maybe just their driveway was in a high-risk zone, but their structure itself was not, they were a great visual to say, hey, look, Mother Nature doesn't read these maps and decide, where she can and can't flood. She's going to flood wherever she wants to, and look how close you are to that high-risk zone. You can still do that. They still have those maps online. Most people don't reach out and actually look them up that way. They go with the zone determination. But there are occasions where you want to take a look at that map or maybe create a format in order to show an underwriter exactly where this property was located. Now, of course, we have Google that can help you pinpoint the structure itself. You've got pictures online along with pictures that we have to actually go out and take when you're doing the elevation certificate. The resources are amazing as to what's available to us now. So with that said, my little clicker is moving faster than I am. Instead of a poll question here, Terry, let's open this up and talk. What has been the most helpful resource to you as agents, or you may not be agents, you in the flood program that you have found to be helpful? And if you would fill in on the chat, give us some ideas that you have talked about or that you have looked up or used when doing research for the NFIP program.
Chad said easy flood, and Heidi posted agent.floodsmart.gov. Shane put my name. Bradley says I refer back to the flood manual and use Easy Flood. And Sheila Farrell says FEMA. So those are some of the ideas that are coming across.
And that's another point to bring up. Up until the last, 5-6 years, we didn't have a lot of private flood insurance out there either. Now we have the private insurance, we have the NFIP program. There's, again, the resources from what we started with, which were none, except the manual and the maps themselves, to where we're going is amazing. It's as an agent, I had stepped away from agency work for about a year and a half, and when I left, everything on the flood program was manual. When I came back, everything was virtually online. Even though it was software at the time, it was not websites. But it was amazing to see the difference and so much more accurate when it came to rating. Everybody's still throwing out some information. Yep. Heidi Keibel says, anyone out there have any counties that have a website for mapping? There are a few. I know here in Florida, we've got a county that will do zone determinations for you, too. I think they do charge like $35 to do that, but they will do zone determinations. So as you can see by the chat, there's some amazing possibilities in resourcing for the flood program now, or answering insured's questions. Again, it was a nightmare back in the day that when I started, because we didn't have CE classes here in Florida for flood, and the very first CE class I ever took for flood actually was mandated by Florida. They told us to go to a community college auditorium, and they wheeled in a TV, I forget what they're called now, but the TV sets, closed circuit TV set, and they actually had someone in Tallahassee read the manual to us for 3 hours. It was an absolute nightmare, and they wondered why we didn't want to sell flood. It actually made most agents terrified of selling flood because there wasn't anyone to go to for those questions and for help. And it made it for a very difficult program to write, as I'm sure you know. So one of the other resources that we now have at NFS is our new website. And please, if you have not gone to it, please go visit us there. It's amazing the amount of information in this little website. We have ebooks, we have FAQs for questions, we have industry news on there, we've got tools for agents to help learn and resources. We have videos and email templates. We have infographic content to use on your social media, which is another whole conversation too, using social media to reach out to your insureds and help educate. One of the problems with the NFIP program or any flood, whether it's private or NFIP, is making sure that our insureds are understanding what they're purchasing or what they're not purchasing in the case of it when they have declined it. It's a very misunderstood product, as I'm sure everybody out there knows. It makes it very, very difficult to have a discussion about because everyone thinks they understand it. I was on an airplane one time. I was wearing a pen that said, I speak flood. Big mistake, because the gentleman sitting next to me was bound and determined that anything I had to say was wrong and that the whole program was wrong and that he knew way more than I did. So I never wore that pen again in public like that. But it makes it very difficult when people think they know this product and they have no idea. So please visit our website here because, again, there's a great section on resources to help start that conversation with your insured, because that sometimes is the most difficult part, is getting going. But if you talk to any very successful flood agent, the first thing they will tell you they do to be successful is to open up that dialogue and that conversation with flood. There are many ways to have like little cheat sheets at your desk to have that initial conversation if you feel you are a beginner and a new person. Terry, I believe, has already put up, or she will, the summary of coverages, which is an excellent resource to keep at your desk for the basic questions about flood. You can order them through the NFIP, through FEMA, or you can download it online and email it to your insureds. If they're thinking about buying a flood policy, they will get one of these after they purchase it, but you may want to talk to them before they purchase it, and they can read through the summary of coverages. There's one for commercial and there's one for personal lines. Again, start the conversation. If you, as an agent, if you're relatively new and you're nervous about it, just remember there is always a customer service unit or someone that can help you with those questions you may not know. But if you don't ask, you haven't even begun that conversation. You haven't even begun to be able to make that sale and to help them. And trust me, and Terry will tell you the same thing. Terry's actually had her own flood event with one of the last major hurricanes here. And it is helpful. It's beyond helpful. I can't even put into words of what it's like to have an insured come to you after the fact and say, thank you for talking to me about this, because otherwise I would have never known. So it's again, a conversation starter with all these resources. So as we move forward, we've made these giant leaps in technology. We have more accurate models now to estimate what the possibility of flooding is going to be and how much damage it could actually have. We have enhanced mapping capabilities. Over the years, they have fine-tuned the survey equipment. We have better and more accurate risk assessment models. We have drones that are helping with claims and in some cases can provide an elevation of a property remotely rather than to have a live person out there. We have, with our new digital images, we have higher resolution. We can really see what's going on with better details. And as I said earlier, quoting has streamlined considerably over the years. Not only like in the case of the preferred risk, where you have a smaller number of questions you have to answer, with the A's and the V zones, the high risk zones, you have a more accurate picture of what's going on based on those questions, because some of the underwriting is being done behind the scenes. It's not being done, you don't have to walk it through a manual application or an additional information that has to be submitted. So a lot of it is there. There's still a lot of paperwork. There's still a lot of additional stuff that has to be sent on some of the non-compliant structures that are built, or in something in a V zone that is a little out of the ordinary. But under the circumstances where we are today versus where we were even 25 years ago, we've come a long way. It's much easier now that we have these tools at our disposal. And I'm going to open this up here with Terry. A couple of things that are going on now out there as far as the digital maps and making them more accurate, making them more information, is there is now something called, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, I hope I am, LIDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging, which is a remote sensing method that uses light in the form of a pulsed laser to measure the ranges. So this is helping with these maps, as on this screen, with sea levels, with just detailed information. And what they're doing is they're pairing that with geocoding, which geocoding is the process of taking input text, such as an address, and returning a latitude and longitude location. So they're working with this information together to produce these new maps. And Terry, I know you were a little bit more well-versed on this subject than I was. Anything you'd like to add to that?
They usually call it LIDAR, is like radar, LIDAR. And it's really a neat technology where they actually fly over and shoot a beam down at the earth, and it measures every dip and rise in the land, and it returns this type of a picture back to them so that they can see and match that up with the geocoding. And the geocoding is just simply, it's the same thing your GPS uses to pinpoint an address. When you're driving up the street and it says you have arrived at your destination, that's because that's the geocode point for that address. So helpful to know, though, that the geocoding is not an entire area. It's one pinpoint spot on the map. And so
it's amazing.
Sometimes it'll pinpoint your front door, but the back of your house may actually be in a high-risk zone where at the front door it's showing that it's not. And so it goes as far as it can go. It's very, very helpful, but sometimes there's a real need to actually look at the maps to, pinpoint things. And our people do that a little bit too. If there seems to be any discrepancies, they'll look at the actual maps and see. Probably also a good idea if you have multiple buildings on a property, like maybe you're writing an apartment complex. If they all use the exact same address, but it's building A, B, C, whatever, it's only going to find one geocode point. And so you may actually have to pull a map and look at where the other buildings are located to see if those buildings are also in a high-risk zone or not, and help our customer service people know which building you're writing on that particular application. So printing out a map and drawing circles and notating things for customer service can be very helpful to them.
Thanks, Terry. I knew I was going to pronounce that wrong. I knew it was going to happen.
It's okay.
So where are we going looking forward? Well, I'm sure several of you have heard NFIP is coming up with a new rating system it's currently being called Rating Risk 2.0. The idea is to make rating characteristics easier to understand for each individual property, such as the distance to the coast or another flooding source, or various types of flooding risk and the factor with the rebuilding cost in mind. It's also, the idea is planned to deliver fairer rates for owners of lower value properties, valued homes. So in the long run, the risk rate 2.0, the idea is that everyone pay their fair share. The idea is that that particular property be rated with the idea that it's maybe closer to the what I'm trying to say, the flooding source than the neighbor next door. Maybe the neighbor next door has a longer driveway and they're further away. They have a mile long driveway where the house next door is closer. It is supposed to pinpoint and make the rates much fairer. And again, going back to everyone pay their fair share. But bear in mind, a lot of this is still a work in progress. The NFIP program and flood programs in general, whether it's private flood or not, everything seems new every day because more information is gathered. Information is easier to get than it was before. I can remember when I was at an agent's office one time who had been around since the program started. And if you remember, our elevation certificates back in those days were not all that detailed. They were one page. They had a few measurements on there, and that's all that was needed back at that time. Well, moving forward several years, when NFIP and FEMA decided that we needed more information on those surveys to rate properly, he was very upset. He actually chased me in the parking lot, being very mad because it was all my fault that the elevation certificates were now asking so much more information, and he didn't have access to that information, and he just didn't understand why, if we could rate it before without that information, why do we need it now? But as we see, more information we have, the better we can rate it, the more understanding we have as to whether it's compliant or not compliant, or what the risk factors are involved with that particular property. So sometimes, as much as we'd like to streamline it, we still need that information to correctly and accurately rate that particular structure. So Terry, if you'd like to put our last poll question up there. And if you would, everyone, please answer these questions for us because it lets us know what we're doing well, if we need to change a webinar, expand it, make it shorter, whatever we need. We like to kind of find out what you're interested in. And while Terry's doing that, and we'll leave that up for a while, I just want to point out again our resources here page on this with some links. Again, please visit our website at National Flood Services with all the information that's available on there. The videos that are on there are excellent. The information for training is amazing. They do a great job with putting this information out there. Also, please sign up and receive the NFS communications. I promise you we're not going to send you a bunch of spam. The communications will